The unending question, the fall of the Western Roman Empire. For centuries, the Roman Empire defined the very concept of global power, civilization, and enduring might. It was the unchallenged hyperpower of the Mediterranean world, possessing unparalleled military technology, sophisticated law, vast infrastructure, and a bureaucracy that spanned 3 continents. Yet by 476 AD, the western half of this seemingly eternal structure had dissolved, replaced by a patchwork of barbarian kingdoms. The fall of Rome remains history's ultimate profound question. If Rome, the greatest power the ancient world had ever seen, could collapse, what chance does any modern superpower truly have? The popular narrative often simplifies the decline into a few dramatic moments, the sack of Rome or the final deposition of an emperor. However, modern historical analysis reveals that the collapse was not a single catastrophic event, but a slow, grinding process, 1,000 small cuts inflicted over 2 centuries by a lethal combination of internal decay and external pressure. Understanding Rome's failure requires analyzing the sophisticated feedback loop, where its internal weaknesses fueled its external vulnerability. One of the most devastating internal factors was economic collapse and hyperinflation. The empire's constant need to fund its massive military establishment, coupled with a lack of new territories to plunder and a continuous outflow of gold to the east to pay for luxury goods like silk, led to a financial crisis. Emperors desperately debased the currency, reducing the silver content of the denarius until it was virtually worthless. This hyperinflation destroyed public faith in the currency, crippled trade, and forced the economy to regress back toward barter. The ability of the state to collect taxes and fund its essential services, the military and infrastructure, eroded catastrophically. The second critical factor was the internal political instability and the crisis of legitimacy. The military machine designed to protect the empire became its greatest weakness. Between 235 and 284 AD, the crisis of the 3rd century, the empire saw at least 26 different men proclaimed emperor, often by their own legions. These incessant civil wars wasted vast resources, decimated the professional army, and exposed the borders to simultaneous incursions. The loyalty of the legions was not to the state or Rome, but to the commander who could pay them the most, a direct consequence of the failing economy. The final fatal blow came from the barbarian incursions, which were amplified by these internal failures. Groups like the Goths and Vandals were not simply invading, they were often migrating, seeking refuge and land, often fleeing the terrifying pressure of the Huns from the east. Initially, Rome attempted to incorporate these groups, granting them land and demanding military service in return. This led to the barbarization of the Roman military, where the traditional disciplined Roman citizen legionary was replaced by less reliable, often disloyal tribal federates. When the empire failed to honor its agreements, as dramatically evidenced at the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, where the Goths annihilated a major Roman army, these federates turned into invaders, easily seizing territory that the politically fractured central government could no longer effectively govern or tax. The fall of the Western Roman Empire teaches a timeless lesson about power. Military might and technological superiority are insufficient if the foundations of the state are hollow. The empire did not collapse because its walls were breached by a superior foreign army. It collapsed because its currency failed, its political class became self-serving and corrupt, and the loyalty of its citizens and soldiers evaporated. The greatest superpower of the ancient world was ultimately destroyed not by its enemies, but by its own unsustainable internal decay. The shattered steppe, the Mongolian Empire, and the fragility of conquest. The Mongolian Empire stands as a unique anomaly in the history of global power. In less than a century, starting with the unification under Genghis Khan in 1206, it became the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever known, stretching from the Danube River to the Sea of Japan. This empire, built on terrifying speed, unparalleled cavalry tactics, and systematic brutality, fundamentally reshaped Eurasian geopolitics, trade, and even disease patterns. Yet, despite its unmatched military dominance, the Mongolian Empire's unity proved remarkably fragile, dissolving into a collection of warring successor states almost as quickly as it had been forged. The collapse of this colossal empire teaches a stark lesson. Military conquest alone cannot sustain a state without a clear, unifying administrative and political philosophy. The Mongol Empire's undoing was not military defeat by external enemies, but a systemic failure of succession and cultural assimilation. The core weakness was embedded in the Mongol concept of appanage, land division. Genghis Khan, following traditional steppe law, divided his empire among his sons and key generals into semi-autonomous regions known as khanates, or uluses. While the Great Khan theoretically held supreme authority, this decentralization created enormous centrifugal forces. As the empire expanded and the distance between the central capital, Karakorum, and the periphery, like the Golden Horde in Russia or the Ilkhanate in Persia, grew, the shared vision of Genghis Khan eroded. The real fractures began after the death of the second Great Khan, Ogedei, and intensified after the death of Mongke Khan in 1259. Without an established peaceful mechanism for succession, the inevitable power struggle among the various Chinggisid lines, descendants of Genghis Khan, triggered devastating civil wars known as the Toluid Civil War. These internal conflicts, not external opposition, halted the Mongol expansion into Europe and the Middle East, diverting precious resources and attention. The various Khanates began viewing each other as rivals rather than allies, prioritizing their own regional power over the unity of the whole. The second major factor was the difficulty of governing diverse settled populations. The Mongols were superb conquerors but poor administrators. They often adopted the local bureaucratic structures and, crucially, the local religions of the people they conquered. The Golden Horde largely adopted Islam and Turkic culture, while the Ilkhanate became Persianized and Islamic, and the Yuan dynasty in China struggled to maintain its Mongol identity against entrenched Chinese traditions. This adoption of local identities, particularly Islam, created an unbridgeable ideological rift between the Western Khanates, Ilkhanate and Golden Horde, and the Eastern Yuan dynasty, ultimately leading to open war against fellow Mongols. The lack of a universal administrative language, religious law, or shared economic structure made the immense territorial unity an illusion. Finally, while often overlooked, environmental and biological factors played a subtle but critical role. The extensive trade routes established by the Mongols, the famous Pax Mongolica, while promoting unprecedented cultural exchange, also unwittingly facilitated the rapid and devastating spread of the Black Death in the 14th century. The plague ravaged both the densely populated conquered territories and the Mongol homeland itself, leading to massive demographic collapse and economic disruption, destabilizing the successor states and accelerating their eventual fragmentation. In summary, the fall of the Mongol Empire was swift and strategic. It did not fall to external armies, but succumbed to the inherent tension between its nomadic tradition of patrimonial division and the imperial necessity of centralized, stable succession. It serves as a profound historical case study. Even the most terrifying military machine is only as strong as the political architecture, or lack thereof, that holds its disparate parts together. The silent abandonment, climate change, internal conflict, and the Maya collapse. Not all great power collapses are marked by massive battles or dramatic political assassinations. The collapse of the classic Maya civilization, 250–900 AD, in the southern lowlands of Mesoamerica, presents one of history's most chilling and complex mysteries. Here, sophisticated, long-lasting urban centers, with advanced writing systems, profound astronomical knowledge, and massive temple pyramids, were not conquered by foreign invaders. They were simply abandoned. This slow internal breakdown, which saw the cessation of monumental construction and the depopulation of major cities, offers a terrifying case study in how deeply environmental fragility and internal social structure can interlace to doom a society. The Maya world was structured around competing city-states similar to ancient Greece. Each city, ruled by a divine king, Kuhulajau, was a center of political, religious, and economic life. Unlike the Roman or Mongol empires, there was never a single unified Maya empire, but rather a network of independent powers constantly shifting alliances and fighting low-level, ritualistic wars. This decentralized structure proved resilient for centuries, but contained inherent seeds of self-destruction when faced with systemic regional pressure. The most compelling modern research points to environmental catastrophe as the primary catalyst. The Maya civilization thrived in a challenging tropical rainforest environment that relied heavily on predictable annual rainfall. Scientific evidence, primarily from paleoclimatology, indicates that the region suffered multiple, prolonged and intense droughts during the crucial terminal classic period, 800–1000 AD. These were not simply dry years. They were sustained decades-long periods of severely reduced rainfall that crippled their agricultural base. The Maya had perfected intensive farming techniques to support their burgeoning urban populations, including elevated fields and complex water management systems. However, this large population, relying primarily on maize, was inherently vulnerable to extended drought. The sophisticated system of water control, which had sustained their growth, now became a liability. As water sources failed, food production plummeted, leading to widespread famine and disease. This environmental stress immediately amplified internal social and political instability. The Maya kings based their legitimacy on their divine connection, claiming the power to communicate with the gods and ensure the rains continued. When the prolonged droughts demonstrated that the kings could not deliver the fundamental promise of survival, public faith in the divine authority of the ruling elite shattered. Archaeological records show an abrupt end to the construction of monumental stelae, carved stone monuments, that recorded the king's reigns, wars, and rituals. This sudden silence suggests that the ruling class lost its legitimacy and possibly faced violent popular uprisings. Competing city-states, already weakened by famine, intensified their warfare over dwindling resources like arable land and water, leading to a breakdown of trade networks and a general regional descent into chaos. The Maya collapse was therefore a failure of sustainable governance under extreme pressure. Their population grew beyond the carrying capacity of their fragile environment, and their rigid, centralized, theocratic political structure was incapable of adapting to a crisis of that magnitude. People did not die out entirely. Rather, they abandoned the complex, water-intensive urban centers and returned to smaller, less centralized and more sustainable rural settlements. The cities were reclaimed by the jungle, standing as silent monuments to the terrifying power of environmental feedback loops. The Maya's fate serves as an acute warning. No degree of cultural or intellectual sophistication can protect a society if it fails to manage its foundational ecological resources. The sick man of Europe, technological stagnation and the Ottoman decline. The Ottoman Empire, which rose from the ashes of Byzantium to become a colossal Islamic caliphate, dominated the Middle East, North Africa, and southeastern Europe for over 6 centuries. At its zenith under Suleiman the Magnificent in the 16th century, it was the wealthiest, most powerful, and militarily advanced state in the world, the geopolitical pivot point between East and West. Its decline, however, was a slow, agonizing process, a long, drawn-out internal erosion known euphemistically in the 19th century as the problem of the sick man of Europe. The fall of the Ottoman Empire teaches a vital lesson often overlooked by military historians. Technological and administrative stagnation in the face of rapid external innovation is a death sentence for any global power. The seeds of decay were sown paradoxically during its period of greatest success. The Ottomans, confident in their existing institutions and military supremacy, epitomized by the elite Janissary Corps, failed to recognize and adopt the massive military and scientific revolutions occurring in Europe from the 17th century onwards. While European powers were perfecting centralized nation-states, fractional reserve banking, and rapid industrial-scale technological innovation, such as improved artillery and naval design, the Ottoman state remained rigidly bound by traditional, centralized, and often corrupt hierarchical systems. The military stagnation was particularly acute. The Janissary Corps, once the empire's cutting edge, became a deeply entrenched, politically powerful and conservative force that actively resisted military and technological modernization, often overthrowing sultans who attempted reform. The Ottoman army essentially fought 19th century wars with 17th century tactics and equipment. This technological gap became glaringly apparent in successive wars against European rivals, particularly Russia and the rising Austrian Empire, which led to devastating territorial losses. This military weakness translated directly into economic dependency. The European Industrial Revolution created an insatiable demand for raw materials and a massive supply of cheap, mass-produced goods. As the Ottoman economy failed to modernize its own production methods, European powers forced highly unfavorable trade agreements, known as the capitulations, upon the Ottomans. These capitulations allowed European merchants to operate with extremely low tariffs and judicial immunity, effectively flooding Ottoman markets with cheap goods and crippling nascent local industries. The empire's financial resources were constantly bled outward. The resulting economic stress forced the Ottomans to resort to massive foreign borrowing to finance military modernization programs they could no longer afford. Starting in the mid-19th century, the empire became utterly dependent on European creditors, mostly British and French banks. By 1875, the national debt was so overwhelming that the Sultan was forced to declare bankruptcy. This led to the establishment of the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, OPDA, an international body controlled by European powers that effectively seized control of the Ottoman Empire's finances, controlling tax collection and revenue streams. The OPDA's control made the Ottomans an economic colony in all but name, giving European powers immense political leverage and accelerating the dismemberment of the empire throughout the 19th century. The final fatal decision was made during World War I, when the Young Turk government, in a desperate attempt to regain lost glory, aligned with the Central Powers. The resulting defeat led to the empire's final dissolution, its heartland becoming the Republic of Turkey, and its vast territories carved up by the victorious allies, Britain and France. The Ottoman story is a testament to the fact that power is relative. An empire does not have to be in rapid decline to fail. It simply has to stagnate while its competitors innovate and accelerate. The Ottoman Empire was ultimately defeated not on the battlefield alone, but in the factories and financial houses of Western Europe. The cracks in the concrete, economic failure, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The fall of the Soviet Union, USSR, in 1991 represents the most recent, most geopolitical, and arguably the most surprising collapse of a modern global superpower. For nearly 5 decades, the USSR stood as the ideological and military antithesis to the West, commanding a vast empire, massive military forces, and a nuclear arsenal capable of destroying the world. Its sudden, relatively bloodless dissolution, occurring not due to external invasion but internal implosion, provides a critical modern case study in the ultimate unsustainability of totalitarian command structures. The key lesson from the Soviet collapse is that ideological commitment and military parity cannot compensate for a fundamentally flawed economic system. The deep root of the Soviet Union's failure was the centralized command economy. Designed to eliminate the waste and greed of capitalism, the system was instead paralyzed by its own rigid structure. Economic decisions, from the price of bread to the production quotas for steel, were made by distant planners in Moscow, not by market forces. This eliminated competition, smothered innovation, and resulted in chronic inefficiencies. While the Soviet system proved capable of achieving spectacular targeted feats, like the launch of Sputnik and the rapid industrialization of the 1930s, it utterly failed to meet the daily needs of its citizens. The result was a profound and growing gap between the Soviet Union's military might and its civilian welfare. By the 1970s and 80s, while the West enjoyed consumer abundance fueled by technological progress, Soviet citizens faced perennial shortages of basic goods, low-quality production, and technological obsolescence. This failure created massive ideological erosion. The Soviet system lost the ability to inspire or even adequately feed its own people, leading to pervasive cynicism and apathy, particularly among younger generations. This economic fragility was magnified by the relentless arms race with the United States. Driven by the need for military parity, the concept of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, the Soviet leadership poured a massive, unsustainable percentage of its dwindling GDP, estimates range as high as 20 to 40%, into the military-industrial complex, MIC. This massive expenditure, coupled with the costly and disastrous intervention in Afghanistan, starved the civilian sector of essential investment and innovation. While the Soviet MIC could build intercontinental ballistic missiles, its factories could not efficiently produce reliable washing machines or computers. The final decisive catalyst came in the mid-1980s with the reforms introduced by Mikhail Gorbachev: perestroika, economic restructuring, and glasnost, political openness. Gorbachev intended to reform and revitalize the system, but his reforms acted like an unstoppable political solvent. Glasnost exposed the massive historical crimes and the present economic failures of the system, shattering the regime's credibility. Perestroika only revealed how utterly broken the command economy was, failing to improve conditions and instead creating mass confusion and shortages. Once the ideological controls were released, the forces of nationalism, long suppressed across the 15 Soviet republics, erupted. The Chernobyl disaster, 1986, further exposed the system's incompetence and secrecy, deepening public mistrust. With the economy collapsing and the central authority, Gorbachev, unwilling to use mass military force against its own people, the state apparatus simply ceased to function. The August 1991 coup attempt by hardliners failed, and within 4 months the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus signed the agreement dissolving the Soviet Union. The collapse of the USSR provides a clear lesson for any centralized power. Fear and force can build an empire, but only economic efficiency and consent can sustain it in the long run. When a state cannot feed its people or compete technologically, even the largest nuclear arsenal becomes a meaningless symbol of an insolvent empire. The powder keg, ethnic nationalism, and the breakup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Habsburg monarchy, later formalized as the Austro-Hungarian Empire following the dual monarchy compromise of 1867, was a vast, sprawling, and ancient European power that governed a dizzying array of ethnic and linguistic groups for centuries. Stretching across Central and Eastern Europe, it was a multinational empire held together not by a common language or national identity, but by the dynastic loyalty to the Habsburg Emperor, Francis Joseph, and a shared, if often strained, bureaucracy. Its disintegration at the end of World War I provides a clear, agonizing case study in the destructive power of ethnic nationalism within a multi-ethnic state. The central lesson from the collapse of Austria-Hungary is that in the age of nationalism, a dynastic empire cannot successfully suppress or ignore the self-determination of its constituent peoples without eventual implosion. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was often described as a prison of nations. It encompassed Germans, Magyars, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Ruthenians, Romanians, Croats, Serbs, Italians, and others. The Ausgleich Compromise of 1867 attempted to stabilize the empire by granting the Hungarians near equal status with the Austrians, creating the dual monarchy. However, this only exacerbated the problem for the vast majority of the other ethnic groups, the Slavs, Romanians, and others, who felt marginalized, politically disenfranchised, and economically exploited by the German and Magyar elites. Throughout the late 19th century, the seeds of nationalist movements, Pan-Slavism, Yugoslavism, and local desires for independence took root, fueled by intellectual elites and sustained by cultural identity. The empire was perpetually forced to choose between rigid, heavy-handed suppression, which bred revolutionary resentment, and political concessions, which risked encouraging further demands and undermining the central authority. The core weakness was the inability of the Habsburg administration to create a unified sense of citizenship or loyalty to the overarching imperial structure. Unlike the United States or Switzerland, which forged new identities out of diversity, the Habsburg system maintained a hierarchy where German and Magyar cultural and political dominance was institutionalized. This structure transformed every localized grievance, a language decree, a tariff policy, an administrative appointment, into a national existential crisis. The start of World War I in 1914 was a direct consequence of this internal fragility, triggered by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand by a Bosnian Serb nationalist. However, the war itself was the decisive force that destroyed the empire. As the war dragged on, the empire proved incapable of successfully waging a total war that required the unified effort of all its peoples. Slavs and others serving in the armies felt little loyalty to the German-speaking officers or the cause of the Habsburg dynasty. Desertions, mutinies, and political dissension were rampant. More critically, the Allied powers, Britain, France, and the US, seeing strategic advantage, began actively supporting the concept of self-determination and the formation of new national states, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, etc. By 1918, the collapse was not a military defeat, followed by a political surrender. It was an internal disintegration. As the military fronts crumbled, the national councils, Czech, Hungarian, Polish, declared independence, effectively dismantling the empire from the inside out before the official peace treaties were even signed. The army simply ceased to exist as a unified fighting force, and the various nationalities went home to claim their new states. The Austro-Hungarian collapse is a powerful testament to the idea that political legitimacy is not automatic. It must be earned and maintained by inclusion. When an empire's strength depends on suppressing the deeply held identity of its populace, a major external shock, like a world war, will inevitably transform those internal tensions into the engine of total systemic collapse. The sunset of power, decolonization, debt, and the retreat of the British Empire. The British Empire, which once proudly boasted that the sun never set on its dominion, represented the pinnacle of global naval, financial, and industrial power in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Its collapse was unlike the violent implosion of the USSR or the sudden disintegration of Austria-Hungary. It was a relatively managed, strategic, yet inevitable withdrawal and devolution of power, driven by unsustainable economic burden and the irresistible moral force of decolonization. The core lesson from the British experience is that global supremacy is ultimately unaffordable when the cost of maintaining it exceeds the will and the means of the home country to pay. The pivotal moment that fatally wounded the empire was World War II. While Britain won the war, it did so at a devastating cost. The nation emerged victorious but deeply indebted, particularly to the United States. Its industrial base was crippled and its financial reserves were exhausted. Maintaining a global military presence, a necessity for imperial control, became an astronomical drain on a treasury that desperately needed funds for domestic reconstruction, healthcare, and welfare. The sheer economic overhead of empire was no longer tenable. Simultaneously, the war irreversibly altered the political and moral landscape of the world. The rhetoric of fighting fascism in defense of liberty and self-determination deeply undermined the moral legitimacy of maintaining colonial rule. The rise of superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, who were ideologically opposed to traditional European colonialism, fundamentally shifted the global power structure. Britain could no longer dictate global terms without the explicit or implicit support of the new hyperpowers. The process of decolonization began immediately after 1945. Key moments like the independence of India and Pakistan in 1947 demonstrated the irreversible momentum of the anti-colonial movement. Britain recognized that attempting to hold on to these vast territories through military force would result in protracted, costly wars, as France experienced in Algeria and Vietnam, that the British public and economy could no longer tolerate. The decision was made to trade direct imperial control for a less costly, more flexible system of influence through the Commonwealth. The final defining humiliation came in 1956 with the Suez Crisis, when Britain, France, and Israel attempted to reclaim the Suez Canal by force after its nationalization by Egypt, the United States, fearing Soviet intervention and seeking to assert its own post-war global dominance, firmly intervened and forced the withdrawal of British and French forces. The Suez Crisis was the brutal public proof that Britain was no longer a world power capable of unilateral military action without Washington's consent. It marked the definitive end of the Pax Britannica. The retreat was accelerated throughout the 1960s and 70s, driven by rising nationalist demands in Africa and Asia, and Britain's desperate need to reduce defense spending. The empire was dismantled not always gracefully, but certainly with greater speed and less bloodshed than many of its European counterparts. Conclusion: the lessons for modern power. The collapse of these great powers, Rome, the Maya, the Ottomans, the Habsburgs, the Mongols, and the British, reveals a set of universal systemic weaknesses that transcend time and ideology. 1. Economic rigidity. Whether through debasement, Rome, command failure, USSR, or technological stagnation, Ottomans, the inability to generate wealth efficiently is the ultimate vulnerability. ideological and political legitimacy, power structures that fail to integrate or represent their populations, Habsburgs, or whose central promise fails, Maya priests, Soviet planners, will fracture under stress. Strategic overextension. The cost of empire, funding massive militaries, policing distant borders, and engaging in perpetual arms races, always eventually bankrupts the metropole, Rome, Britain, USSR. Failure to adapt. Confidence in past methods, Ottoman Janissaries, French Maginot Line, Mongol succession laws, prevents necessary innovation, leaving the empire vulnerable to new threats. Today's global powers, whether defined by military, financial, or technological dominance, are not immune to these forces. They must constantly manage the tensions between internal debt and external commitments, between technological progress and ethical governance, and between the demands of stability and the need for constant, painful self-reform. The history of collapse is not merely a record of the past. It is the ultimate warning system for the future.